Timo to organizing these events. These are super important for us as an Upcloud to have these kind of opportunities to have developers attending our office and hear some like interesting speakers. And warm thanks to Timo, and then I have special guest like straight from Germany, our CEO Arno, who gladly wants to tell a couple of words about European sovereignty and meaning of like being able to provide like IT services from Europe instead of like from the US. So Arno, please.
Yeah, thank you. So welcome. I'm Arno, and I have the pleasure of leading Upcloud. So thank you all, and welcome in our office. Thank you for organizing it. Thank you, Michael, to be part of that. I mean, I don't want to say much, but obviously Upcloud is a European cloud provider, built by engineers for engineers, focus on performance, predictability, and easy and simple APIs. And we are happy to host this event today. And I just wish you a great evening, great discussions, great collaborations, great talks. And just want to say thank you for being here. So I guess I'll hand over to you, Michael, or I don't even know.
I have a few words.
You also have a few words.
Yes.
So welcome.
Also on my behalf, welcome. And I placed again the advertisement here for the KCD, which will be happening in May. So if you're interested, check it out. There's the address there, and I don't have the QR code here, but maybe you can get it there. And Andre probably can tell that what was the deadline for proposals for the event?
Well, it's end of this week.
End of this week?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have any ideas, just post it there, and don't worry if you don't have it ready yet, because you still have time to prepare it if you get accepted. So you just need the title, that's all. We are also planning the meetup for March. Currently it's reserved for 26th of March. I have a bit of conflict with the time there, not myself, but for the host and speakers, and let's see how it goes. But currently it's reserved for that, but there will be most likely also meetup in March. I don't have anything planned for April yet, but if you know kind of some company that could be hosting it, I've been checking some, but there's nothing decisive, so I'm open for any proposals. So at least in April we could have a meetup, and then I don't know if I should steal some space from KCD or leave your May for that then. To be seen if there is interesting speakers coming up and willing hosts, so why not? But maybe KCD would be the place to go. I don't know, that welcome, and we have had a bit of a talk that should there be some kind of punishments for those people who make no-shows. Like today we had 90 registrations. I can see that we are maybe about 60 here. So I mean that there's 30 people who have registered but not coming here. It's kind of sad, but I'm kind of used to that. It was just kind of we had with Ilkka a bit of a chat that how much people we can kind of officially let in the registrations and how many will come here. But I said saying that don't worry, I have the experience that there's lots of no-shows every time. So we are, I would say, quite the max amount for this space right now, and that's just great. But nothing further from me, so next we will hear from Michael about the EU data regulations.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you need this microphone?
No, I have pretty loud voice. Let's try to plug the cable back and see if it's still working.
Yeah.
Do we have a drum roll from somebody? Well, something is happening at least. And let's see if my clicker is still working.
Oh, by the way, if somebody needs Wi-Fi, it seems to be that the information was here. Password is simply Upcloud guest in the lowercase letters. Network Upcloud guest.
All right, hello dear friends, my name is Michael, Michael Samarin. I work with Futurice, and I'm heading our cloud offering here in Finland, our cloud upskilling and our cloud partnerships. In fact, pretty much most of the technology partnerships with Microsoft, AWS, Google, Databricks, Snowflake, our wonderful friends Upcloud. So thank you very much, Ilka, for inviting me here to speak. I spent half of my professional career at Futurice, 18 years, so I've been around. And this topic today that I would like to talk is actually quite hard. And it's hard for multiple reasons. So basically, this is our challenge today. And I'm pretty sure that sooner or later or already you have some thoughts what to do, some concerns. And the challenge that we are facing today, it didn't start today. It's actually a long time challenge, and it's the writing on the wall. But the fact is why it's so hard, because I guess most of us spend a significant part of our professional careers with the public cloud, with AWS, with Microsoft, with Google, and starting to think how we decouple and how we pivot, how do we start using something different is very hard. So I'm expecting some probably even emotions, some resentment, and for some internal conversations that I had before, it might get quite heated. The important message that I would like to deliver today, let's try to take a look with very sober and cold look at actual facts of the current conflicts of the legislation, of what we have as an alternative. Do we have some solutions? How we discuss with our colleagues at AWS, Microsoft, etc. And the most important, how do we build services here in Finland? What we should be concerned about, right? So this is attempt to have this a sober look of some legalities. And this is essentially what we would like to achieve. So we would like to have data, well, essentially the digital sovereignty, so that at least, if not on an EU, at least on a national level, everything that we build can operate independently, regardless of what kind of changes in the international legislation. And the most important part, that the data and services that we build and provide are subject of only one legislation of the place where we provide them and where it's located. And this is very difficult, actually. This is a difficult topic to discuss. And the challenge is because we have this big conflict of laws. And as many of you might guess, on one hand, we have GDPR, which is very strict. It has very significant penalties, and essentially, for the past several years, it guides everything that European companies and we here in Finland with our customers are doing. From the other hand, we do have US Cloud Act, which essentially in direct conflict with GDPR. Literally direct conflict. You can't have both ways. So basically, in a nutshell, of course you can go to the official documentation and read the entire law, but in a nutshell, US administration can force absolutely legally with the court order for any US cloud provider to hand over data which is located in the EU. It doesn't matter actually where it's located. So this is a big big problem, and I would like to stress that this issue didn't start with the current US administration. And everything that we are talking about today, this is an official US foreign policy that's been there, if not for decades, but at least for the past decade. So this is absolutely nothing new. And in fact, the original US Cloud Act, I think it was started to be enforced in 2018. So not even the current administration. Of course, with the geopolitical events of today, we have quite a sober look at what's happening around and what can happen, but this problem is not new. And since this is not a new problem, how EU and US were trying to kind of bridge this legal gap. And we do have at least several attempts to bridge the gap. But this is the impact, the current impact of what can be with the US Cloud Act, which is right now active. Extraterritorial reach. Essentially, any US company is subject of this law, meaning that it doesn't matter if they're providing services in the EU territory. All companies are subject of this law. The interesting part that we assume, for example, if we work with the Microsoft Finland or Microsoft LLC in Luxembourg or AWS EU Sovereign Cloud GmbH, etc., they are all subsidiary and they're automatically subject of this law. So this is kind of a first problem. The second problem is, of course, a direct conflict that with the data in Frankfurt, US can issue a legal order to seize the data or get access to that. And the legal reality is complying with the order will violate GDPR. And the issue that, for example, cloud provider will comply, they might be subject of an EU penalty, but you are, or not you, but European company, which is providing services, if data was handed over, it's actually their fault according to the legislation. So basically, by doing nothing, you can be, waking up one day and you are a subject of GDPR penalty. And so what do we have else? We have actual public acknowledgement from the executives of the cloud providers under the oath that they cannot provide any legal guarantees that the data will not be handed over. And again, how the gap was attempted to be bridged, and we have a history. Yeah, go ahead.
About the second bullet on the previous slide,
Yeah.
so that is there a need for this court order for that, or,
Yes.
or is it just that the cloud provider can actually do it without any court order?
If we're talking strictly legal, it has to be a court order.
Okay.
Yeah, it has to be a court order. There are issues where it's not needed, and I will cover this a bit later, and it's much more scary than what I showed right now. So the first attempt was called Safe Harbor Agreement, and it was actually invalidated in 2015. So the first attempt has failed to bridge the gap. Then there was a second attempt that was invalidated actually in 2020. It was called Privacy Shield. However, it was challenged in the court and it has failed. And the names, Schrems 1, Schrems 2, these are just the names of the cases based on a person who actually started the legislation. But this is a fact, and currently we live under the third attempt, and many of you probably know this. So this attempt is called EU-US Data Privacy Agreement, or DPF. And so this is a current attempt to bridge this gap. So that, for example, how does this mechanism work? Essentially, it's essentially a register, electronic register, where a provider tag themselves so that under the EU agreement and US agreement, they are entering into this data privacy framework, meaning that when you upload your data, for example, to a server somewhere outside Europe, you are still covered by this DPF, of course, under all the limitations of the GDPR. However, the big challenge that we have now is that it's been challenged already in the court, it's highly unstable, and it will fail. So it's not the fact if, it's fact when. It will be invalidated again. And another big problem is that DPF is based on the agreements with the FTC, Federal Trade Commission of the US, which is in their turn currently is in constitutional crisis right now as we speak. with the hearing scheduled for the summer of 2026. So it doesn't matter if it will be invalidated in Europe or in the US, it will fail most probably during this year. And this is a reality where we live today. And this affects all of us, whether by action or inaction. I mean all of us as providers of the services who are developing and deploying to the US-based public cloud providers. So this is our reality today. So we can scrap that. And now let's talk about some very interesting events of last year, when basically we have started to see very challenging geopolitical situations. Apologies for the wall of text. You don't have to read it. I will just cover it. There was a hearing last summer, June 10, 2025, in French Senate, where Microsoft executives with following names were under the oath and giving the basically all the information that they obliged by law. And the challenge is that these are very public high figures at the Microsoft hierarchy, and they essentially represent Microsoft even though they are located in the EU. So, and these are the most important. So this is it's a fascinating, if you like, for example, crime novels, or if you would like to, if you read like, I don't know, James Headley Chase, like Perry Mason and stuff like that, you can actually find and read the hearing. It's very interesting, but the most important parts are, so this is a quote translated: can Microsoft guarantee legally that it will refuse a valid request from the US government to access data stored in France? And the answer was that no, I cannot guarantee that. So that's a literal translation. And then there was a deeper question: if there would be ultimate conflict of law, what is the Microsoft allegiance? And the answer was that it was, of course, a US allegiance, meaning that if they are pressured, they will hand over the data. And this was probably legally one of the like a single watershed moment of the last year, where there are no more guesses. So this is a legal precedent, and everything from that moment on is guided and covered by this. So none of the US cloud public providers can provide any legal guarantees that they will not follow US Cloud Act. As simple as that. So this is a reality that we live in today. And there were a couple of immediate fallouts. So for example, there's even name kernel admission. And the first one is that, for example, Google attempted to sell sovereign solution to the NHS, National Services in the UK, which was challenged then after that. So they were not able to do that because of essentially results of this hearing. Exactly the same, for example, in Germany, it's now forbidden to use M265 in schools. And these are just one of the kind of a few examples of like immediate knee-jerk reaction of this, but the reality is this is a public legal case which we can actually use as the basis for further discussion. What do we have as a reaction from all hyperscalers? If you are very actively involved, for example, with Microsoft or AWS for the past 2 months, many of us were actually flooded by the messages, communications, and offers regarding the EU sovereign offering. So, as we know, AWS just launched EU Sovereign Cloud GmbH with the first data center in Germany, with complete hardware, network isolation, etc., 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 etc. If any of you participated in Microsoft partner events of last week, apologies. There was a last week dedicated presentation by Microsoft Finland regarding EU Sovereign Cloud offering and minimizing impact of US Cloud Act, with the consequence like emailing to all the Finnish partners a very large presentation and documentation about that. But essentially, if we can summarize what is the current EU sovereign offering from hyperscaler, so we can call it like sovereignty by obfuscation, essentially. And it means that we offer it network isolation, hardware encryption, and organizational structure. For example, AWS is leading here with the organizational structure because all the employees of the EU, AWS EU Sovereign Cloud GmbH are European employees, absolutely isolated network with the all kinds of hardware solutions. But the fact is that none of this matters. So this is essentially a marketing theater. I might be a very strong words, so if my AWS colleagues will hear this, apologies. We've had these discussions multiple times, and also there is a promise. It has never happened in the past X amount of years that we handed over data, which also kind of questionable, and I will explain you why. And regardless of all of the discussions and promises, there are no legal guarantees. So if you challenge directly your colleagues at our kind of friendly companies, there are no legal guarantees, and they cannot be provided, of course, because all of the EU sovereign clouds are subsidiaries of the American companies, and that automatically makes them subject of the US Cloud Act. So this is a reality today. And what do we do? Well, let's first read some emails. So last week, after the launch of EU Sovereign Cloud, AWS sent out to all the partners the explanation of impact of US Cloud Act, and with the, I would say, attempt to minimize and soften the law. But I want to bring here a direct quote from the email. So this is a one-to-one quote. Cloud Act applicability. Here is the critical point. The Cloud Act applies to any cloud provider that operates in the United States or has a legal presence there, regardless of where their headquarters is located, meaning that they're implying that, for example, our dear friends at Upcloud, Scaleway, Overcloud, and Hertzner, so they're all subject of the US Cloud Act. Is this statement true? It is true, but it's not entire and complete truth. So that's the problem. So you cannot legally change this statement because it is true, but it's not entirely true. And the problem is that in the US Cloud Act, there's a special kind of a legal hook that if EU provider has a US subsidiary, then this subsidiary is absolutely no questions. This is a subject of US jurisdiction. And so there's no questions in that. And there is a special clause called possession, custody, and control. If US subsidiary has any of these over the data in the US territory, in the EU territory, it means that they can be a subject of US Cloud Act and they will hand over the data. And argument for the access, of course, because you do have possibility to access, and you are US subsidiary, meaning that you will hand over the data. And from the European side, of course, there is an argument against the access. And if organizational and technology structure of the subsidiary is not accessing the European data, then it's not subject of the European part of the agreement. And this is also current situation. As we know, for example, our friends at Upcloud, they have a strict isolation of their US entity, and they are challenging this. But this is also how, for example, when you have a discussion with your colleagues, AWS, Microsoft, Google Cloud, and you see the statements, so just make sure that you would check the actual complete reality. What else? Well, so far we've been talking about US Cloud Act. And if you notice any public debates in our local media in Europe, everything is circling around US Cloud Act. However, there is another legislation which makes US Cloud Act a child play, essentially. Anybody knows what I'm talking about, except Ilka? Any guesses? I do have fancy music here, so I prepared my soundboard. Anybody? This is so-called Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, Section 702. And this is probably the most important legislation that's currently active, which literally makes US Cloud Act an obsolete and not that scary. The fact that this is not a new thing, so it's been in action since, I believe I might be mistaken, from the 70s. And it's been augmented multiple times, and extended and extended and extended, and it happens at regular intervals. However, the interesting part of the latest augmentation, which has happened in 2024, targeting specifically non-US personnel located outside of the United States. So essentially, this is kind of an interpretation, but again, you can publicly read this. Essentially, any US intelligence agency can force and target non-US personnel, can force any employee of the US company to perform surveillance actions. And this is a very important part. Unlike US Cloud Act, which requires a judge and a court order, this law does not require a court order. It's actually issued by a secret court, and it's automatically, or as they call legally, programmatically approved. It does not require any approval. And it often comes with a gag order, meaning that you are legally obliged to keep your actions in secret and lie about them, and it will be absolutely legal. So essentially, any US personnel can perform spying action, lie about it, and get away with it, and it will be 100% absolutely legal. And I would like to also stress, these are not the actions of the current US administration. This is a normal, long-term foreign policy. And what are the most critical and most scariest part of the augmentation in 2024, with all these fancy names, but essentially a definition of who is providing. Essentially anybody who has access to the equipment that provides communication services. So this is written in a law. And another important part is that it impacts both downstream and upstream, meaning that it can be actually an employee of a company, a security guard, or a janitor who will be legally obliged to insert and flash the hardware of a router or a server and get access to the, I don't know, like exposed RAM, etc., etc., etc. And it will be absolutely legal, and it will be done in secrecy, and nothing can be done about that. So this is an actual law that we have right now, and as you see, it has very important implications. So it makes, like, you know, the whole story of bring your own encryption keys absolute myth, because as long as you literally keep the encryption key and data at the any digital equipment is not transmitting that encryption key, you are of course fine. But the moment if you are performing any action in terms of the loading data analytics, having any transient access to the data, it means that it's exposed. And there are implications, for example, and again, I would like to stress, these are implications that, for example, the French hearing, when they were pressed if, for example, any actions were performed under the Section 702, the answer was like in Mission Impossible, I cannot deny or confirm any of these actions. So basically saying, I don't know. And the implications are, is it the truth or is this person under the gag order? We don't know. And essentially, whenever we are talking about EU sovereign cloud isolated hardware, it can be that it's legally already modified. So, and this is basically a reality that we live today. And then there's a third, so this is kind of a second legal issue. So we have US Cloud Act, we have FISA, Section 702, and there's another legal issue. And this legal issue is executive orders and sanctions, which are essentially ad hoc implementation of any existing agreement, and any US company has to comply with that. And again, this is absolutely legal mechanism. There is no secrecy or anything in here. And probably the best example is last year, Microsoft suspension of accounts of the ICC. And basically in May of last year, they had to suspend one of the prosecutors' email accounts because of the sanctions against ICC, absolutely legal sanctions, and Microsoft, being a legal entity, has to comply. There's a good outcome of that, of course, that in October, Microsoft was decoupled from ICC, and they moved to OpenDAC and hosted completely in the European Union. So, and if you've been following the scene of OpenDAC during the past year, it has developed tremendously. So this is something to be concerned. All right, so these were all the legal parts. Now let's talk a little bit about infrastructure. So do we have time? Yes, we have.
I have a question about the
sure.
legal part.
Sure.
So what is considered the jurisdiction for this legality? Is it all, let's say, they say in the US it's all legal, but where's the jurisdiction of that legality? Is it global? Do they automatically enforce everything globally?
Of course not.
Do they have
they have jurisdiction over any American company. It doesn't matter where it's located.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it.
So in a way, some stuff we don't have to agree that it's legal, even though they say that it's legal.
Yeah. But again, as Microsoft confirmed under the oath, they will comply, even if they're located in Europe. Yeah.
If it was a matter of non-US citizens, then it would be illegal here, but not illegal if that non-US citizen would migrate to US after his crime.
I don't know. So basically, the FISA targets non-US citizens. And I mean, nobody. So we don't talk about Snowden revelations anymore. But if you remember, like Snowden revelations and prison programs, etc., these are all part of the FISA targeting US citizens also. As far as I understand, again, I'm not a legal expert, I'm just a cloud person. But this is something that is written in the law that current Section 702 targets non-US citizens. Yeah. All right, I promised that it will be quite sober, cold, and emotional. Let's get a bit more emotional, right? I would like you, friends, to scan the QR code. This is a Proton blog, and they have fantastic research of the Europe's tech sovereignty. You don't have to read now. Just like put a bookmark, because it covers pretty much almost all European countries. It's very lengthy, and you can see the apologies. You can see the methodology, etc. What they did is very interesting. They estimated, based on public data, all the public listed companies in Europe by country. They have very interesting research related to GDP, etc. But essentially, dependence of European country on US-based technology. let's concentrate on Finland only today, and 92% of Finnish publicly listed companies is dependent on US technology, meaning that, for example, this very famous like kill switch can be applied. Essentially, Finland is under the control of a foreign entity, which has absolute control over everything. And I really recommend explore this very interesting read, and also gives you some perspective. And as I mentioned, so Finland covers like 92% of all publicly listed Finnish companies are heavily dependent. And this is a reality because most of us helped build this. Do you feel responsibility? Yeah. So, and it's not an accident that we are here in Upcloud office talking about that. But what does it mean in practice? If let's eliminate ill intentions, and if we just talk about technical problems. During the past 6 months, I made a map, not a map, I made a quick statistics like only AWS and Cloudflare. So the major disaster that affected a lot of us, October 20, when US East essentially went down, and it exposed the cascade nature that basically everything depends on US East. And what happens also, what we've been observing, that for example, many of the services rolled over properly to, for example, EU backups, etc., etc. However, most of the authentication providers, they were so heavily based on US East that you could not, the service is live, but you could not access it because authentication doesn't work. So, and then just 8 days later, there was another major outage based on exactly the same US East. And a little bit earlier, there was another one. So this is just AWS. I didn't know, how about you? We've seen a major effect of this October 20 effect. So basically half of the day we were not able to work.
Yeah, I didn't even notice them until somebody mentioned, it's out again.
Yeah, but we were not able to work because a lot of the dependencies and a lot of dependencies for our customers. And Cloudflare, one of a time, like the worst event as they explained since 2019, and never happened before, will never happen after that, and less than a month, another one, and last week, another one. And these are all, so by the way, these are not human errors, so these are automatic or automation deployment errors. So when we completely exclude humans, should we start talking about AI or? So, and the problem here, how do we operate locally in all our public services if we are reliant on the cloud providers, which are not even in the country? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, are you sure all of these have been accidents or kind of some secret orders to stop the systems and get some time to read the data in peace?
Depends on the mood. If I am in the crime investigative mood, so of course we can have all the theories, but I believe these are just technical failures. I hope. The challenge that we see here, if we talk about our public services, let's take transportation. HSL, you're buying tickets, it's running on Google. VR, when you're buying tickets, it's running on AWS. We don't even have a data center of AWS in Finland. And Google, a data center in Hamina, very successfully sold. It's not independent. It will go down, exactly, it will go down in a few hours if we would lose internet connectivity. It's heavily dependent on the main Google consoles, essentially. Public services in terms of the health, etc., 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 etc. So, and of course, one doesn't have to be, thinking, but if you start thinking about Finland without internet, we are back to 19th century, essentially, within 24 hours. And again, this is how much control can be used but let's forget about ill intentions. Let's just talk about technical failures. And now let's talk seriously about Finland without internet. What will happen? And of course, we can talk about cable cutting scenarios, like satellites jamming, and think about foreign adversaries. But let's also just forget about this and let's just look only about the technical failures of cables and satellites. And now another question to you. Who knows what is Carrington event? There is one, yes. So, Carrington event, it has happened in 1859. It was just a major solar flare. We had rudimentary telegraph. It knocked out the whole telegraph system, burned down several telegraph poles, several machines, etc., etc., etc. Currently, it's estimated in whatever the units they are, like X something. So it was a major coronal mass ejection, and there was a sequence of the events, how Earth and Sun were located, but basically it was like direct hit, essentially. Since then, we have developed our electrical system a little bit. And one would assume that, well, it's a one-of-a-lifetime event. However, I was terrified to learn it's happening all the time, essentially. So I have a record here for the past 100 years. 1921, basically, telegraph, railroads, signals, towers burned down, and it's called New York Railroad Storm because essentially it's knocked out the railroads. If we look a little bit closer, 1972, a major storm exploded naval mines in during the Vietnam War. So U.S. had naval mines. It's actually exploded them. It's because it's triggered the magnet sensors. And it hit right between Apollo 16 and Apollo 17 launch, and it was just pure luck because otherwise the astronauts would not actually survive the impact of the radiation. If we closer, 1989, so-called Quebec blackout, it was X-15 flare, and it's collapsed the power grid in Quebec, causing blackout, and it's burned out transformers at the one of the U.S. nuclear power plants. If we closer to our modern time, 2003, called Halloween Storm, that was also direct impact. It actually caused major blackout in our neighbors in Malmö. So basically they were without electricity. It's actually burned out few satellites, and the ISS crew had to hide in a special place so that they would not be actually radiated. 2012, that was a major storm that is actually on the level of the original Carrington event. It just missed us. It's kind of a grazed, but it's missed us. If it would actually hit, we would be back to 19th century for a couple of years. So, and this is not an isolated event, and of course there are preparations for this kind of event, so there are modifications to the power grid. Major estimates were done after the 2012, including undersea cables. So we don't need the anchors dragging the sea to cut cables around Finland. We need just a major solar storm, and the repeaters would be burned down unless they are isolated like they're supposed to be. So what I'm saying is that we don't have to think about major adversary actions. It just can be act of nature, and we will be without internet. And basically, all of us and the management of the companies that we are operating with, and all of you, we are living in a so-called, as I keep telling it, I'm reusing this slide all the time across multiple presentations. It's like a hope-based management. So the scary part, I'm using this slide for the past decade maybe in very different topics, and it actually applies in many different subjects. So, meaning that we really hope for the best, that nothing will happen until it happens. And it also brings me to two of my favorite movies, Jaws and Dante's Peak. So I'm pretty sure many of you know Jaws. I'm not sure about Dante's Peak. The idea is that the big boss essentially knows about the threat, makes conscious decision to ignore it, and then either himself, his close people, or actually the citizens are suffering the consequences. He was not eaten in Jaws. He was killed in helicopter crash in Dante's Peak. Sorry for the spoilers. So, like after paying up to the helicopter pilot, hoping to, escape after the bad decision on the last helicopter with the golden parachute. So, but this is kind of a, to lighten the mood. But this is something that is happening and potentially can happen. And of course, what do we do? So, otherwise it would be a pretty depressing talk, right? Hope for the best. What do we do?
Rent the movies.
Good idea.
Call Futurice for help.
Yeah. I would love to, but the answer is right here. We are sitting in their headquarters. And let's not pimp up the Upcloud too much, but essentially, if we are starting to consider European options, and luckily we do have many, but if we are thinking about Finnish sovereignty, we do have a major cloud provider in here next door with 2 data centers here, and hopefully exploring and expanding their services. But in practice, of course, ultimate solution, hey, tomorrow just go to your workplace, start migrating everything, right? So it's not going to happen. We all realize it's not going to happen in a reasonable amount of time, but this is it, and it's not something you have to be prepared. You just have to start slowly planning and doing this. And I would like to actually, before showing like the first solution, I would like to talk about another accident, but it's a good one. So UniSuper, it's Australian fund, and so they are very large. So they have about like 90 billion fund to manage, and the outage started on May 2, 2024, and of course Google saying it was one of a kind, never happened before configuration error, but essentially they wiped out the full cloud account, including all the backups, including absolutely everything. So the company was eliminated. Why I bring here as a positive example? Because they were able to restore within a week. Why? Because of the solution that we have to start looking into right now, at least, and this is external backup. So they actually had very expensive third-party external backup. Rumor says it was Azure. We don't know that, but essentially it was another cloud provider where they had not only the data, but also the infrastructure, configurations, and everything else. So they were able to, with a week gap, they were able to roll back their services. They made a joint statement with Google, will never happen again, yada, yada, yada. But this is one of the first items that you have to do. Even, and the why people don't like backups, because they're expensive. So try imagining any of our local major enterprise handling the third-party backup outside of their cloud provider. But this is something that if we do have a backup of both data and infrastructure configuration in a local EU-based cloud provider, it means that we do have possibility to restore with the pain, with a huge amount of spendings, etc., but we are able to go back. The second part is, of course, I mean, we are not inventing here anything, classification. You have to classify your data and workloads. There are two axes. Data sensitivity, in terms of like you can reverse this, whatever is more important for you. Because, for example, in here, public website content is not that much important, but all your internal data under GDPR is the most important. But essentially, do multiple level of classification and start moving from the most sensitive. And there is a second axis, workloads. Data is just one aspect. Actually, data can be relatively easily handled with backups, etc. But again, you can have multiple categories in terms of your, your secret sauce innovation, in terms of your core operations, and your standard IT functions, depending on what is the most important for you. So we are not inventing a wheel here, but once you do have this starts to at least help you to see if everything goes bad, where do you go? What is the step number 1? What is the step number 2? What is the step number 3? And of course, consider all 3 architecture models, like the 2 opposites, like 100% all-in on European cloud, or either the hybrid, splitting the workloads based on the either legality of your solutions. We do have customers who are saying we don't care about legality, not because they are bad, but because it actually doesn't really affect them, but we actually care about operations, about speed, about costs, about access, etc. And of course, multi-cloud decoupling, so like spreading within multiple cloud providers, including the European cloud providers. So these are not some secrets, these are not new, but this is something that you have to do. And finally, these are 5 areas. You cannot defend anymore the monolithic monocloud approach. So this is something that you have to consider. You have to prioritize and classify by sensitivity, whether it's operational or legal sensitivity. And of course, with all the AI advances and the fact that the most advanced models and most advanced services are on US cloud providers, however, there are alternatives and you can use them in isolated, safe environments. Another important organizational part, in your organization, you have to establish the council. So bringing together IT, business, and legal to follow all of those changes in legislations and at least seeing what is the current status of potential spread of connectivity issues, network infrastructure, etc. And finally, of course, turn it into competitive advantage, because I noticed myself when I'm looking at certain services, if they are actually openly advertising that they are hosted on Upcloud, or so I'm interested. It's a marketing, of course, but this is something that can be an advantage. And basically, the true have a target for you, like a true digital sovereignty. And it goes beyond compliance, as I hopefully covered. It covers both legal aspects and the actual physical access and control, so that you can continue operating. If everything goes bad, you are out of network and you are isolated within a country. You can have operational plans if you are pressured by legal challenges. And finally, it's not only local data. This is something that goes beyond that. And I hope this talk would give you some food for thoughts. And please remember, there is always good guys next door, and of course we're here to help. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, it is for this cloud operator that has 50 data centers in 12 countries. Two of those happen to be in the US. So is there somewhere, was there a statement that they are actually separated
Yeah, there's
sufficiently that
Yeah, we have
they cannot
even
creep
like
into
published a blog post about that. It's
Yeah.
an important like
Okay,
of course issue
okay.
for us.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
need to have the separation for the US entity, so it's
I
fully
literally
separated.
was grilling them last week. Yes, yeah. There was another one. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So, very interesting talk, by the way. It seems like there are two ends of the spectrum here, right? On one end, someone on the business side is going to argue for how much value am I unlocking by partnering with one of these cloud providers versus the probability of the DR event of this type of thing happening.
Yeah.
On the other end of the spectrum, there's going to be what's to stop a FISA court ruling on the supply chain. So any cloud provider or even a local provider is still going to use chips that are based in the US, technology servers that are Dell or whatever else. And so how do you align somewhere in between?
Classification. Yeah. Basically those two accesses so there's no easy answer to that. And basically you have to make, nobody invented anything else here. You have to make lists and see and compare. And just have those risk-based scenarios. That's why this presentation was called Risk-Based Cloud. So the problem is that when we talk about probability, it's not if it will happen, it's when it will happen. So, and this is something that many people forget. And supply chain is of course the most difficult one. But then again, if we start hopefully looking at long term and we see at least some first hopes that we, for example, I can bring you like our local quantum computing company IQM. They're building the actual fabrication in Finland finally. And this is slow by slow happening. We do have a satellite provider here, ICI. And eventually, hopefully, we would have a wider variety of suppliers. But the fact is, even just think about it, even if we will get stuck right now, so today we are cut off from all the new technology for 5 years. We're gonna be fine, like seriously, because we are talking about national infrastructure that has to provide basic services. We are not even talking about, making business out of that, but we are talking about survival, essentially, and the basic services, and we have to start in there. And then also you have to argue with your business counterparts in your company, what happens if you are offline for 2 days? If the entire web, your web portals, your customer-facing services are offline for a couple of days, can you actually sustain the drop in revenue, etc., etc.? So, and these are exceptionally difficult topics. And the problem that we are currently seeing is that these are such major investments, and they've been done, and all the companies, large enterprises, are living on enterprise deals. Like they are 3 to 5 years deals. And of course, purely from financial perspective, how to start justifying these changes is exceptionally difficult. But sooner or later you will have to do, or somebody will do it for you, with the much worse consequences if you would start these processes themselves. Our best customers that we see, they've been looking at this problem, but because again, the EU cloud providers are relatively new and not that mature, but some of our best customers, they were decoupling multiple of their services across all 3 cloud providers, kind of a pick and choose, and whatever is operational during the next outage, etc., etc. So, but these are all the topics that we have to start considering. And what I'm saying is the hope-based approach is one of the valid business strategies until it fails. So, and I don't have an easy answer for you. Yeah. But these are exactly conversations that we all have to start having. Yeah, thank you. There was, and then you. Yeah, go ahead.
I have actually, well, 4 things. More or less.
You have to
maybe
wait.
they are short. But first of all, you were talking very much about the cloud providers.
Yeah.
Should you have considerations about also the tool stack that you are using?
This is such a separate, huge topic that we would never leave, so from this room. But this is another one.
Turn on the sauna and
Yeah, but meaning basically that even if you handle this cloud side well, you are still kind of in a bad situation if you haven't thought about your tool stack.
Yeah, that's why I brought in the example of ICC with their major move to OpenDeck. And I have no idea how they have developed during the past year. And this is something that is, you can actually use a company for the deployment as a commercial service, or you can deploy locally yourself if you would like to have. So, and it has progressed tremendously, including everything like email messaging, the office suites, etc., 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 etc. So this is something that I was not aware how much it has developed, and this is something to consider.
Then next thing about the numbers about the sovereignty, that Finland is using 92%. There was an example like Portugal, 72%. Do you know why they are in a much better situation regarding the use of US systems?
I think number one is actually Bulgaria. They are not that much reliant, and this is, I don't know. I would advise you to read the report, because they also disclosing the methodology, how they are doing the estimates, etc., etc. And this is very fascinating read. It's very long, and with all the clickable infographics and statistics. And but this is a reality. And also, there are tendency in some countries to use their local providers more, and including their tooling and services and financial services. And quite often, for example, if you like thinking about ERP in Finland, there are literally 2 choices or 3 choices, like Salesforce, Dynamics, and like SAP. If you go to Germany, it would be probably SAP. If you go to some other country, it would be actually some of the local providers that we've never heard about. And this is something to start exploring, actually. Do we have a services?
Yeah, maybe we as Finns don't understand that how like forerunners we are in the cloud, so maybe the cloud isn't that much of the thing yet in Portugal.
Yeah.
It sounds like strange, but that's only expensive.
Another thing that, for example, we do have, Futurice does have offices in multiple countries in Europe, and for the past 10 years we were observing how much more advanced actually the digitalization in Finland, comparing to or kind of a cloud nativeness. Essentially, we are being punished by our own success of adopting early and going deep. But this is reality.
Yeah. Hope-based management. I think our government is constantly showing that independently who is there, and now our government is very much promoting these new data centers for the US-based companies. So do you see anything good about that?
I would like to consider the risk-based scenarios. If tomorrow Finland would be without internet for a month, what will happen? I think this should drive all our decisions. Period. Yeah. And not only because of the, as I said, geopolitics and foreign adversary. I've been probably diving too deep into nature science and like seeing the impact of natural catastrophes, solar flares, like earthquakes, etc., and windstorms, how much damage it can bring, which is not recoverable in an easy manner. So this is something to also consider.
Last thing was that, very last thing shortly, just that thinking about this situation that if people and companies have to look at, okay, there is no way to protect the data, and that we have in the community these kind of open data enthusiasts, and if it starts to look like it, okay, it's the only data there is public data, isn't that kind of a good trend, kind of where we are ending up based on all this trouble what we have here?
To be honest, I don't think there is a concept of open data. There is always something that has to stay private. So, and this is something that the conversation in terms of the let's put it this way: the reality we live today and for the X amount of decades in front of us, if we're here, is so that we would be living with the current legislative system for quite many years, and we have to deal with it. So that's
all right. Thank you. Now I shut up.
I don't know who's first. You can pick.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you not only for the presentation but also for the very exhaustive answers. My question is more from a different angle. So before you hear it, like I'm more interested in your angle on that. So it doesn't need to become a broad topic, but like, what is your opinion about how consumers, the end consumers of tech, any tech product, perceive the change? Because in B2B, there's a lot of takes, there's a lot of topics about the whole cloud sovereignty. But the example that you made about VR being on Google Cloud and HSL being on AWS, I did happen to know that, but that's because I work in cloud computing. But I'm sure that if I would now take a walk on Alexander in Calvin and I would ask to 10 people, 9 of them would be like, what? And the 10th would be like, yeah. So I'm just curious on your take of that. I'm just using that as an example on like, because oftentimes the final public of a product doesn't seem to care. I'm curious on your take on that whole topic broadly, and also how is it going to increase as companies, European companies move to Europe? Sorry for that over elaboration.
Unfortunately, I don't remember where I heard this in relations to when Sony Walkman tape cassette player was introduced. And or was it when sorry, apologies to Sony. It was when the debate, if you're old enough, VHS over Betacam. So, and the answer, the horrifying answer, you can't beat cheap plastic. And that's the problem, that in most of the cases, whether willingly or unwillingly, consumers and general public will always look at the most available and most affordable option, even if you would like to have something different. But you either cannot afford it or there's simply no options. If you look at the, for example, penetration of ChatGPT, you see this, or any of the smartphones. And this is a world that we built together, and we build this culture, and this is unfortunate something that we have to deal with. And you are very, very true. The public is willingly or unwillingly is very ignorant about these issues until something bad will happen. So it's been, if you're studying history, it's been like this, like as long as humankind exists. And this is something that is very difficult to change. And that brings us to whose responsibility of that. And I tend to think that this is our responsibility, because we are very often on the positions to make the change and start moving certain digital things to the better direction. So, and then again, move our willing or unwilling public to the either discussion or to the choice. So that's basically how you operate.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
We have time for one more question. Really interesting talk, and we talk about the legal and the reliability, but also about do you have any take on the economical impact? Because at least I would rather give money to Upcloud than to send money over the Atlantic. And at least usually it's like how those cloud providers actually got so big, they got like public contract, but if the European alternative, they didn't get this head start, of course.
This is how would I say this? Of course, this is another of those choices. Where would you like to give your money? To stay locally or move overseas? Another thing that we have to actually start to bring to the attention of our business colleagues that are often considering, for example, any migration project simply as a cost. We had very interesting discussions with some of the customers saying that they are actually considering European cloud providers because of the cost implication. If you look at certain workloads, not only you are gaining European sovereignty and local sovereignty, you also looking at cost reduction anywhere between 30 to 70%. Not because of some special pricing, but because the price structure is very different. So when you pay to Azure or to AWS, you are actually paying to all of those new data centers and research at the same time. So there is always, it's not like, for example, our local cloud providers are not going to do any research or not going to make any profits, but the cost structures, at least what we see with the Upcloud, with the Hertzner, with the Scaleway, is very different from many of them. And by moving, you are not only starting to invest into the local infrastructure financially, but also you are gaining financial advantage. So.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else?
All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Maybe during the break, but how great Azure is. Please, Juho.
Thank you. Okay, so as Timo mentioned, I'm going to talk a bit about Azure policies and, well, showing something about those, and, well, yeah, that's about it. And of course, hard to talk after previous presentation, but I try. But yeah, starting first from me. So, as previously I said, my name is Juho Saarinen. I work at Witted Mavericks, and well, here are some kind of information. Maybe the one thing that is shown from the images is that I collect a bit of those different kind of certificates, and that list I think is now up to date.
But I mean, you have more AWS certificates than Azure certificates there.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I would say due to partnership, because my earlier employee has to get the partnership level, which required to also get those left side AWS certificates. So I first had those right side and then made the left side kind of just to get the numbers right. But yeah, so I have been consultant around 20 years, first testing and then moved more of DevOps and architecture side. Kind of have a bit bad feeling of testing because many customers at that time thought that when you are a tester, you don't talk about code, you don't talk about architecture, you don't talk with the developers, you just test. And usually, well, you know what that means. And not really kind of, I would say, IT background as a studies sense. So made some physics, mathematics, some courses of computer science, but mostly these other natural sciences. But yeah, that's about me, and we can move to the main thing. So first about Azure policies. And well, in simple way, they are way to ensure the compliance of the resources and things at the Azure. And they can audit things, they can block things, they can mutate things before the deployment. And then if something is deployed, they can also automatically remediate the issues there. And they are not only, of course, most they are automatic, so you don't want to prevent something bad to happen. But there are also possibility of manual kind of proof that someone says that yes, we are done everything according to the book, and stamp it, and then we have kind of nice looking list from the portal. Okay, things are okay now, and this team has to do something because they haven't signed with their blood that things are working like should. But there are some, I would say, catches which were initiators, so to speak. So when something is denying you, when some policy is deployed which denies things, it works immediately. So after the deployment, the non-compliant things are denied. But if something is at audit mode, it might take 24 hours to refresh the statuses. And then those who think even a bit of testing might start to think how fast test these things that might take 24 hours to refresh. And for the developers, the policies are JSON formatted, and basically they compare the JSON formatted resource definitions with the rules and then act according. There are some functions. They have limited possibility to go outside of the specific resource. So, for example, if I'm checking this virtual machine, I can see some information of the resource group, I can see some information from the management group subscription, but it's quite limited. So it's not kind of thing that if this and this, that's kind of this resource and this resource, they don't, at least easily, can be done. And yeah, Microsoft has a lot of ready-made policies. It's just a matter of how those are configured. And also custom can be made. But in simple sense, they are just kind of rule engine rules. And that's other thing what kind of, well, made me think about if things can be done better way. And yeah, one catch which especially is kind of not so nice with the developers is that the policies, of course, can refer exactly the resource JSON fields, but there's also a list of aliases. So one alias can mean different things with different resources. And basically, for the code that I wrote, the alias list is about 10 megabytes. 10 megabyte CSV, which has 4 columns. So quick calculation might kind of give a hint how many lines there are. But yeah, so a bit small, but basically policy definition is something like this. The example is actually from Azure built-in, so those who know Azure probably know it by heart, and other ones just can facepalm or something like that. And as I mentioned, the thing is that the alias is here. So for example, this example checks the virtual machine scale sets, and something else. And it refers to some kind of short looking fields. But these fields have different meaning for each and every of these resources. So, well, as I said, it's quite messy thing when started to think. It's kind of that those who know. But yeah, that's kind of the background of the policies. So now everyone about know what they are. So what if we need to either configure or develop those? So first of all, we have different kind of objects in this policy landscape. We have the definition that you saw just before there. It tells which resource to check, what are the criteria, and what should happen if the criteria are met. So basically, if clause. Then there are initiatives, which are also called policy set definitions, which collect many of those definitions together. So if we, for example, want to check some virtual machine things, we probably have to include multiple definitions. And why we want to use the initiative there is because the only one of these 3 objects, the initiative is only one which can contain multiple definitions. Assignment is only one. So we don't want to assign 1,000 policies one by one. We want to assign one initiative which contains those 1,000 policies which affect the same thing. And of course, if company has some cloud control framework, there might be some mystical IDs, like this is networking, this is security. The initiative is easy way also to kind of combine the policies with those. And the assignment, of course, can be made to multiple levels, so it can be scope to resource group, subscription, management groups, or the tenant level. And now, again, a kind of sneak peek of the testing. Normally, I would say companies doesn't have multiple tenants. So if there is some policies that are deployed to tenant level, and you have only single tenant, and you mess up the policy definition so that it blocks creation of crucial resources, well, Azure way is that deploy it and check how it works. Hopefully you can revert back quite quickly. And yeah, then the policies also, as said, they can do multiple things. They can be disabled. Well, like it is, it's not in use. They can append or modify or mutate the calls that user makes so that the resource gets kind of, it changed. For example, add some blocks for the network security groups, changes basically OS for the VMs. You try to deploy Linux. No, you don't. You deploy always Windows, that's it, kind of things. Probably no one would do something like that. Basically, that's possible for the policies. Then, and these are in order, so in this order they are evaluated. Then, after the mutation, it's the deny hits. Because, of course, we shouldn't deny the call that might be mutated. So only after mutation, the things are denied if it still hits to these rules. Then audit is kind of obvious, collecting the things, just knowing if things are compliant or not. Basically not acting for those directly. Then manual, like I said, the possibility to require someone manually said that we are done everything by the book. Then a bit kind of more, I would say, special cases or special effects, audit if not exists. So basically if something is missing from the resource definition, it audits and note that this is only audit, this doesn't deny, it just audits. And then the deny action, which sounds nice and very kind of useful, except that it doesn't work anything else than it can prevent deletions. It can't prevent any other actions, but Microsoft has maybe thought it a bit wider because deny action is not deny deletion. But then if some action, some resource, some kind of resource needs to be, or policy needed for the auditing or denying, how it's done? Well, first of course, it would be best to check if Microsoft has something offered already. So not starting to write those horrific JSONs and thinking how to test those. Kind of hint, there isn't any other testing than this deploy, try, and hope kind of thing. So Microsoft doesn't offer any, I would say, testing frameworks. Again, we go there later, but that's the case. Then there is, normally you can see some information of the policies from Azure portal, but maybe that tells about the usefulness that there is separate web page, AC Advertiser, which is basically the tool to check what policies are doing what and how they should be used. So maybe it should hint maybe Microsoft a bit about the usefulness of the portal for this kind of use cases. And if there isn't suitable policy for built-in ones, then of course self-made policies can be made self also. And of course, if there's multiple policies needed, then initiatives, etc. So parameters, scope has to be taught, and then as said, this when writing, especially when writing the custom policies, if you are not fully committed, fully used Azure for some time, those aliases are kind of, well, strange thing. Of course, if you are only targeted to one resource, you don't have to use the aliases. But for example, this virtual machines, because you have virtual machines, you have scale sets, and you probably want to make the policies that hit to both. The only way to do those without copy pasting would be to use the aliases. Yeah, and as said, highlighting one alias can have multiple meanings depending on what resource is defined at the first criteria of the policy. So, when the policies take tools, we first select or write the definition or definitions we want to use. If there's multiple, we need initiative. Then we have to think what parameters the policy has, or what parameters has to be set to the policy, because of course quite often there are default values, but they are not the ones you probably want. And then of the scope, as said, if you deploy deny policies to tenant level, that's quite bold. Especially at Friday code on kind of deployment. then when the definition or definitions are done and initiative is needed are done, then the assignment according the scope and the parameters that just are kind of planned, deploying the assignment, and then the main thing, the verification. So if you have denied policy, as said, it's easy to check. It immediately starts to block. So you just try to create some non-compliant, compliant resource, check that things work. If so, good. Of course, again, testing mindset hits. If I do two kind of resource deployment, does it mean that there is no regression? Does it mean that I haven't blocked anything that should be able to be deployed? Or is there some kind of corner cases that allows the deployment, even I think that it shouldn't? And this comes especially when making the initiative with multiple definitions. So are those kind of working together as should? And auditing, yeah, technically same thing, except for the 24-hour delay. There are commands to trigger the update, but they are not kind of, I would say, rockets either. Those also take kind of minutes, and when thinking of the testing of these kind of things, you know basically immediately, or should know immediately if it's okay or not. Not wait to trigger some run, it runs maybe 5 minutes. And yet then the mutation, kind of same thing. The good thing is that mutation also starts to act immediately. So immediately after deployment, resource deployed, hitting the policy would mutate or should mutate, and then it can be checked that is it mutated accordingly. And yeah, so kind of in simple way, deploy policy, assign kind of specific scope, and try to create resources with compliance and non-compliant way. But like how simple it sounds, but then there comes these structure issues, I would say, the levels, if the scope is tenant is quite big, if the scope is management group still, is your company who has Azure in use available management group structure that doesn't kind of allow the testing, so it has enough subscriptions, enough different kind of subscriptions, for example, or are you using basic production management groups, which then inherits easily the thing, so basically same kind of blast radius can having the tenant level things. And then the bad case scenario also, if your policy is incorrect and you, let's say, deploy Kubernetes cluster, oh, it should have been denied, but now I'm waiting 1 hour. Kubernetes cluster is on, and then 1 hour to remove that Kubernetes cluster, or Microsoft SQL, or kind of some other these resources that have quite long time to provision and be provisioned. Because of course you don't want to leave that kind of resources running there. But that's quite, I would say, maybe boring to just talk about that. So let's see if I'm able to show something here. Trying to hit the correct thing. Yes, and then taking the screen somewhere. Now I try to now yell because it's much easier to have both hands available. Dun, 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 dun. Now, yes. So I just for the preparation, I created the one resource group and one managed identity. And now what I also would do, I would create single federation for the management group. So maybe the name also tells why this is created. But basically, I have now one, because now I don't have any policies deployed related to this. So this, like I said, see, the deployment was okay. Then I can take one initiative. It's, yeah, as seen, Microsoft loves the UID, so everyone sees immediately from that UID what it is. and those who don't, that initiative contains the federation, built-in federation policies, so allowing to deny or allow federations towards, for example, Azure DevOps, GitHub, AKS. It combines those. And I deploy it to the scope of the resource group. And like I said, the policy assignment needs two things. Usually it requires scope always, and then it requires parameters. And now, it's nicer to check things with deny mode because it's immediate. And then I create the policy assignment. And now I have that specific policy with specific, that initiative with specific parameters deployed to the resource group as the scope. And then I can try and check if I make basically the same with different name, but this is otherwise this is exactly the same resource. And now what it should happen, it very user-friendly tells that no, you don't, because of this policy. Somewhere here mentions yet management federation credentials should be approved types from approved federation sources. So, like I say, user-friendly way. But now of course the thing is that what's the problem then? And yet the ACID advertiser in this case would say, okay, there are different federations or the federations by default are false, so they're not allowed. But because I deployed this specific kind of federation, the deny also works as audit for the existing resources. Except, no, it doesn't, because as said, it might take 24 hours, the audit mode, to and now if kind of thinking of the IT in mind, the scope is resource group, which has single resource, and still it might take 24 hours that Azure would tell that single resource in that single resource group is non-compliant. Yes, it's about the kind of scale of the Azure, but still thinking of one single element in very specific scope. And yet there is basically a way, as said, to trigger these things manually. But again, we have single resource group with single resource. And I think that I could say that quite many times while that progress goes on. So the audit mode, the same time, so the audit mode testing, well, yeah, it might be a bit hard. But even though it didn't succeed or end, it might be that, sorry, wrong command. It might be that actually it wasn't. So yeah, like seen, auditing is not there yet. And then now, of course, we can have this kind of So now we allow GitHub as a federation source. And this then, because we changed the policy, the parameters, we just update the assignment. And now, if things are like they should, I should be able to deploy new federation for the GitHub. And because the parameters I put somewhere here, we see that the allowed GitHub repo owners, only allowed org is allowed. So the example previous one had the organization allowed org, and then if having this other org, which is not allowed, very nice, again, user-friendly way told. And basically this I would say could continue. I have also other example, because now this was just about the parameters. But then if I would create custom policy, then this kind of come a bit harder even. I have custom policy which I have to test, and the format is not really user-friendly because there's no IDE helping me to fulfill that policy format. It's just basically, it's just text. It's nothing more than, it's JSON, but it's text. It's not kind of context. There's no context awareness or anything. Let's see if I quickly deploy the other one. Okay. Oh, yeah. So I have prepared this. Okay. Oh, that was then wrong. Let's see. Yeah. So now I have deployed new policy which kind of denies pull request if the environment subscription level tag called environment says production. So basically, don't put PRs to production. And now, because that was the custom policy, I had to first deploy the definition. Then I deploy the assignment. And then I try to deploy to this subscription which has tag environment production. I try to deploy this pull request federation. And now it fails. And now there is some kind of somewhere tag checking policy assignment. Well, that name, but it shows that it's not Microsoft thing. So basically now it's easy for deny. But now if I would have to make some changes here, I probably want to audit this first. And then we are back to this point that it's quite hard to get the audit results visible. And I think that now we should have a couple of the non-compliant resources, because the original one that I created was with pull request. And yeah, now we have some information here. The point is not about how many these are, but just that we know that we have federations that are non-compliant, and now they are visible at the audit sense. Yeah, but that's I would say is the so that is kind of, let's say, traditional. That's normal way, if not thought about the kind of anything further, because as I said, there is no tools offered to make this any nicer way. So wouldn't it be nice to verify these things that I showed with the CLI before the deployment, or even before the merge to the kind of main branches? So basically, like I would say, normal normal software development kind, that you have PR, you have tests there, then you deploy, you merge to main, you deploy to somewhere and make some, let's say, longer lasting tests like these ones. But now, current approach is that you just have to deploy something, so you have to have something to deploy to, and then these scopes are quite tedious in a way. So, repeating myself, there is no tooling offered by Microsoft to do any testing of the policies. The thing that I showed is basically described also the MS Learn, how you develop policies. There is one kind of proof of concept kind of way to verify policies. Funny thing is that actually Janne Mattila is, or at least was, Microsoft employee, but apparently he hasn't been able to kind of push the idea forward. But yeah, so I find that it's some C# thing. It's made kind of very if else kind of clauses. So there's a POC sense which is very specific policies, but not generally. But in a way, as said, the Azure policies are kind of rules, and we have multiple rule engine implementation across different languages, like rules, for example, in Java. And no worry, I don't speak about Java. That's something that usually people know. But if we have the rules and rule engine, couldn't that kind of solve the issue of locally testing things? And what I tried, yes, it would. So I wrote a custom Golang application using the Gruul rule engine. So, like those who know Go, most of the Go packages start with G because for Go rules. And what is nice is actually this rule engine can be extended with own functions. So the rules can contain function calls, and the functions are kind of at the same, very fast to execute also. And even nicer way with this one was that the policies were able to be presented in a JSON format. So it was quite easy to start converting or it was thought that it would be quite easy to convert policy definition JSON to this Gruul JSON and then inject those to rule engine. And what else this tool does, it downloads those missing definitions or initiatives from the ACID advertiser. Because as shown, we can usually, when developing the policies, especially when using the built-in policies, you don't necessarily even check the policies what are in the initiative. It is enough that you know that, okay, this initiative solves my issue. And yeah, so it creates a JSON, then when the rule engine is on, it takes each one resource at a time and tells if the policies or rules it knows affect to those resources. And yeah, so disclaimer, very proof of concept still. Some policy functions are supported, but because you can do very exotic things, I would say, with the functions inside the policies. I can say that some are supported. Some that I have tested, I have fixed at same go. So yeah. And currently it's not in that sense testing tool because it doesn't make the return goes other than 0 all the time. I mean that if you expect that this resource would be denied and it's audited, it's printed of course that yeah, now I audited this, but it doesn't fail the build. So that kind of testing evaluation in sense is not there. But I think that's the, I would say, boring part. So again, same thing. We have this JSON policy here. And one thing actually interesting about the policies, there's the mode. By default, it's indexed. And indexed means that it only affects the resources which have tags and location. And like federations, of course, doesn't have those. So there's also all mode and handles all resources. And when that previous policy JSON was converted to cruel rule, it looks something like this. It might be a bit more readable depending on the policies and usage of the functions, and then the 10 clause is mostly it's basically 3 lines of or it's more of kind of debugging information, I would say. Kind of what effect would be if this would be created. But maybe it's nicer to see than just read from the slides. So let's see. Getting back to terminal. So basically, I have now this FIC limit issuers. That's the same initiative that I deployed manually first. So, and as you see, I have the same parameters here. Allow federated credentials true, and effect is deny. And now, when I run it, it first loads those policies that are at the initiative, and then it puts there, as you see, testing file is basically the resource definition. So it loaded 3 different policies to base, and then it shows that, okay, each of these is denied with the specific policy. And of course, now you know the reason is because I only allowed at parameters the federations. I didn't explicitly allow any source of the federation, because of course, why not? Why? If I allow federations, of course, I would presume that it means all. But no, each and every source of the federation is separating. But now I immediately saw that my parameters are wrong. In Azure, yeah, it was quite fast because this is deny, but still I had to make the deployment, which is not necessarily fastest thing on earth. But now, if I allow the GitHub and run exactly same resources through, okay, now only one of those failed because, as the name says, it's the AKS federation, and I didn't allow AKS federation. But now I got immediately feedback that, okay, this one resource wouldn't be allowed, and in my case it's okay because I didn't want to allow the AKS federations. And there are kind of some of these built-in policies have these kind of interesting things. For example, in this case, if I don't define any allowed organization, it means that all organizations are allowed. So kind of other way around than if I don't say allow GitHub, it's denied. But if I don't give any allowed organization, it thinks that everything is allowed. So these are not necessarily always kind of logical in a sense. But then if I say that, okay, like in demo, allowed GitHub repo owners, only the allowed org is allowed, and still effect is denied, we can see that it changes. Now the last one, which is maybe so now better, so managed identity federate from GitHub must be from trusted repository owners. This is the other org, which is not allowed org, so it fails. And then if I add that production kind of pull request not from towards production rule in. So as you see, the initiative name is now FIC limit issuer and subject. I see that there are now kind of the biggest thing compared to Azure is that in Azure you get only one deny. So in a kind of thinking of this regression thing, if you have some policy hiding the other policies, you don't know if those other policies would affect if for some reason that first denying policy is removed. That kind of testing you can do, because then it's denied, that's it. It might evaluate at the background, but it doesn't tell it. So basically telling this information that this last GitHub federation with tax to get with the deny mode. Of course, with audit mode you can get it if you if you wait. So again, it would be, I would say, for regression tests also, at least for me, this kind of information is much more crucial than knowing that, okay, I can't create the federation, because if now this first policy would be dropped, how I can say that this last one is actually hitting? Here I can say it, but at Azure I basically would have to somehow allow this first policy first, so that the second one is hit. Yeah, so basically I would say that was it. The repo mentioned is not yet public. I'm going to change it after this talk, and it's going to be found there. But as said, disclaimer, still it's kind of POC, it's evaluation. But if there's kind of someone thinks that this would be useful, at least I think that this is would be quite easy way to make the policy development more like software development and not just some kind of black magic kind of thing. And then there is the blog post from Janne Mattila about this, his implementation, and stating, I would say, quite same things at the blog post, that how hard it is, how slow it is, how brittle it is to handle these Azure policies. But yeah, that's it. And the famous thing, questions, I think Timo starts.
Yeah, well, last time we had a talk from a person who had used years AI for creating IAC configurations. Have you tried using AI for creating Azure policies?
I think that it's a different question in a way, because again, the first example used Microsoft built-in policies which were just misconfigured. I still have to test those. If AI writes me policy definitions, policy initiatives, policy assignments, I still have to test those. So, but basically, that wasn't answering the question. The answer to the question is that no, at that time when I worked more of those policies, the AI tool was more like denied at that point still. But that said, I would say that it would be even more crucial to have some pre-verification tooling, or then completely separated tenants, completely separated environments at Azure to verify that things are working as should. And it might be quite hard, especially at enterprise world, where you might have the whole networking set up which policies affect. And seldomly there are two exactly same kind of tenants with exactly the same kind of networking set up. So yeah, some kind of answer to your question.
Yeah, so recently I also had the misfortune of having to do stuff with these policies. I believe like deploying the diagnostic settings to resources
Yep.
if they were not deployed from
Yeah.
exist action. And the problem I had was that, there's the embedded ARM template in the JSON. Would this sort of method also like help alleviate that pain?
Well, currently it only supports those audit and deny with the specific policies, but of course the mutation would be, well, if this would be developed further, I think the mutation would be one thing, but I haven't touched much of those, but basically yes, that kind of thing should be. And then what also comes in the picture, at least with this solution, is that the rules have the salience or importance, and then because now I actually don't care about it, because I kind of I evaluate all, and as shown, I can get multiple denies, I can audit and deny, that kind of things. But with mutation, the salience is more important because it has to mutate first. It doesn't make any sense to audit or deny the resources before this mutation happens. But yeah, it's something that of course might be useful, and if there is kind of seen the need and interest of this tool, then I would say that those have to be checked more closely.
Yeah, second question is that now as you have experience with the different cloud providers, so how you do compare working with the policies here with Azure with the other service providers?
Well, I think it would have been nice to have a good answer for that, but I think that with the AWS, which I've worked quite a lot, the SCPs have been at some others' problem, I would say. So I haven't touched much of those, but what I, at least with weak glance, that AWS has some tooling that allows making the service control policy checking before the deployments. But so they are kind of, at least at the paper, they are further with this kind of SDLC for the policies thinking than Azure. And with Google, I haven't actually used their similar thing at all. I think usually these policies and service control policies and Google same things, they are a kind of separated team, or they are kind of separated from the, I would say, normal developers, and it might be even that the persons who handle those are not the developers, because in a way policies, they are not technical thing mostly, they are more of the, I would say, defining what you want to block, it's kind of more of the management business thing than the development thing. And maybe due to that, there isn't the tooling for the developers. Okay, nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Juho, and thanks for our host, Upcloud. So, what's our deadline here?
Yeah, maybe we can stay like 1 hour or something, and we have plenty of food, so if you are hungry, you can always take something with you, because otherwise we need to like roll in the garbage can. So please enjoy the food and maybe stay for 1 hour and then we like close the door.
So you can continue chats here.